One of the biggest criticisms of Cities Skylines II since its release in the fall of 2023 has been the lack of expressive options for the player to customize the look and feel of your city. This sequel lacks a lot of the content that was in the first game, but considering that the first game had a 10-year-long lifespan during which it received around a dozen expansions, numerous other content packs, and uncountable mods and community assets, it is understandable and, in fact, reasonable that the sequel would feel a little lacking in this regard at release. We cannot expect a brand new game to have all of the content of such a massively expanded and modded predecessor. Now, that being said, I do think that there are a few ways that Colossal Order could modify its rules and mechanics in Cities Skylines 2 in order to restore some of this expressiveness and customization and specialization that feels like it's been lost in the sequel. I already published a video and a blog outlining my suggestions for a modification to the building upgrade and industry area mechanics in order to make them a lot more flexible and to allow greater freedom for the player to tailor how these assets look and behave in your cities. While I was working on that video, I had another idea for how Colossal Order could give players a bit more expressive control over their cities. I had originally planned on briefly sharing this other idea in that first video, but since that video was already like 30 minutes long, I opted to make a second standalone video for this other idea. As I mentioned in my previous feature suggestion video for Cities Skylines 2, I have posted a poll on Patreon asking if patrons would be interested in seeing a farewell tour video collection of my Cities Skylines 1 cities before I eventually uninstall that game for good. And, at that point those cities would probably just disappear into the ether forever, never to be seen again. This poll will close at the end of April. If I get enough interest in such a video, I will plan to begin work on it during the summer. Remember, my channel is not monetized, and so all of my financial support comes from viewers like you via Patreon. Patreon pledges go towards offsetting the cost of the licenses for the software that I use to create video content like this, as well as the cost of maintaining the blog website at www.MegaBearsFan.net. Patrons receive previews of upcoming content, early access to select content, and also voting power in polls of what content I will make next. I would like to take this moment to sincerely thank all of my patrons, past, present, and future. Your support really means a lot. In addition to the industry area and building upgrade suggestions that I already made in the previous video, I would also like to suggest that Colossal Order give us limited ability to choose what type of zoned building will spawn in a particular block of zoning. I propose adding a feature in which the player could spend development points or experience points in order to choose what type of building will spawn in a zoned area. Say there's a spot downtown that you think will be perfect for a large hotel tower. Well, if my suggestion were implemented and added to the game, you could spend a development point or some experience to specialize that block of commercial zoning as being reserved for lodging services. It's basically a more granular version of the specialized districts from the original game, in this case the tourism district of After Dark. Instead of painting an entire district as specializing in tourism, I think you should be able to reserve a single city block or maybe even a single plot of land or even maybe cell by cell for a specific use, such as, in this example, lodging. The specific use case that made me start thinking of this is that whenever I would build specialized industry areas away from the main city, I like to build small villages or rest stops off of the highway. Usually, I want these rest stops to consist of gas stations, a restaurant, and a motel of some sort. Maybe also a convenience store for people traveling along the highways, and heck, maybe even a bar for the truckers. Why not? This is largely inspired by my experiences driving on the interstate highways in the United States Pacific Southwest, where these little rest stop villages are, every 30 minutes to an hour along the highway. In my review of the game on my personal blog at www.MegaBearsFan.net, I mentioned that Cities Skylines 2's new progression and unlock systems allow players to build communities like Barstow or Baker in California, and this is what I'm talking about. The gas station and restaurant are usually not too much of a problem in the game to get those to spawn, though it may require subsidizing those sorts of commercial buildings and then babysitting the area in order to bulldoze buildings whenever something that I don't want spawns until I finally get one of the buildings that I do want. However, getting a motel to spawn has proved almost impossible in these locations. My understanding of the way that the game works is that the reason for this is that there are invisible demand and or desirability metrics for each industry and also commercial building type, which influences whether a building of a given type will spawn in a particular location. So even with subsidies, the motel won't spawn in this area because it's probably being seen as very low desirability for lodging. I think lodging likes to have parks, recreation, and other tourism buildings nearby, so being off the highway next to a bunch of industry isn't really looking very appealing to people who want to build hotels and motels. So personally, I would like for Colossal Order to make locations near highways much more desirable for lodging, since pretty much anybody going on a road trip is going to want to, just pull off the highway and be able to stop for the night. My suggestion would extend to other types of zones, services, and industries as well. So, do you want to make sure that there's some raw material storage at the edge of your specialized industry areas or your factory district? Well, with my suggestion, you would be able to reserve a plot of industrial zoning for, say, ore storage. This would effectively act like the storage ploppables in the industries expansion. Want to build a tech hub downtown? Well, you could reserve some cells or a block or two of office zoning for software offices. Again, this would replace the need to specialize an entire district as an IT cluster, as we had to do in the Green Cities expansion. And if you don't like the specific building that pops up, well, you can simply demolish it to try to get another building that looks better and offers the same service. Now, it is definitely worth pointing out that placing specific buildings is actually possible within the game already. It requires using the developer tools, which allow the player to place any zoned building in a specific location, as well as many other decorations and ploppables for customizing your city. However, using the developer tools is kind of cheating, and it has the potential to destabilize the game and maybe even corrupt save files. So use it at your own risk. As such, I think it would be nice to have a way to do this sort of thing within the rules of the actual game and to have some gamified cost benefits going on with using that mechanic. So my suggestion would allow players to place more specific buildings without having to install mods or having to cheat by using the development tools. So how would my suggestion actually work? Well, I think there's two ways of going about this, and I have a preference for one, but I think either one would work. The first method would be that the player could spend development points to reserve a certain number of cells for specific usage. This would require a substantial rebalancing of the amount of development points given and the cost of nodes on the development trees. The number of development points given by each milestone would probably have to be increased by quite a bit, and the cost of nodes on the development trees would have to be increased proportionally in order to compensate. Otherwise, I think spending an entire development point just to specialize some zoning would probably never be worth it. So, these numbers need to be balanced in such a way that these two different actions are about on parity with one another. So I'll confess, I haven't actually reached the final milestone in any of my Cities Skylines II cities yet, but my understanding is that this would put a hard limit on the total number of cells that the player could potentially reserve, because I don't think the game continues to give you new milestones or development points after the final milestone is hit. Also, each development point that is spent on reserving zoning would be one less development point that you could spend on nodes in the development trees, which could potentially lock certain cities out from ever being able to buy some nodes. Because of these problems and limitations, my preferred method of implementing this suggestion would actually be to just spend raw experience points directly for reserving zoning cells for specialized usage. Each cell that you reserve should cost a certain number of experience points, and this cost should scale up as more cells are reserved. This puts a practical limit on the player's ability to micromanage every single plot of land in the city. In this implementation, the player's ability to reserve zones for specific usage is technically unlimited, as long as you continue earning experience. The trade-off is that the more you specialize your city's zone usages, the longer it will take to level up to a new milestone. This will slow down the city's overall growth and progression, and might also put financial strain on the city, since the influxes of money from hitting milestones will be spaced further apart. Also, this gives the player something to spend your accumulated experience on after you've already reached the final milestone, or you've unlocked all the development nodes that you care to unlock for that particular city. Cities do keep getting experience after the final milestone, right? Again, I don't know, because I haven't actually gotten any of my cities that large yet, but I don't know, maybe it's not. But if not, then it should be, so that you would have something to spend it on. In any case, this ability would give the player a lot more freedom to tailor the look and function of their city, while eliminating the need for complicated specialized districts. It would also give more utility to experience points and the development points, and it could potentially make the game more challenging. As I mentioned before, it could strain your budgets and slow down progression and unlocks. It also more closely mirrors the way that actual cities plan their development, since it is very common for real cities to reserve or prohibit certain types of businesses from operating in certain locations. For example, most cities have ordinances that prohibit things like strip clubs or bars from opening within a certain distance of like an elementary school or a church. Cities Skylines II doesn't have strip clubs in it, at least not yet, but it does have bars. So we armchair mayors could potentially make sure that the commercial block next to our elementary school is populated by family-friendly businesses using this mechanic, if that is our prerogative to do so. This proposed mechanic also, in one fell swoop, would potentially give us back some of the specialization options that we lost from the original game's expansions when we moved to the sequel. Like, this proposed mechanic would basically give us back the bulk of the specialization options that were available in the After Dark expansion, the Green Cities expansion, and even part of what was in the Industries expansion. I really do think that between this mechanic idea and the one that I proposed in the previous video, Colossal Order could bring Cities Skylines II up to having almost the level of expressiveness and customization and specialization options that was in the original game and most of its expansion packs. I mean, there's still a lot of stuff that's not there, but this brings the game a lot closer.